Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's BQE webinar. As you get settled, a few reminders before we get started. Please use the Q&A section for any questions today, and remember to be constructive in any of your comments and questions to the presenters or to one another to ensure we have a session that is productive. AI California will submit one AIA learning unit for those who complete today's session live. And as always, the webinar content and additional resources will be available online shortly after the session. Today's webinar, Your Next Hire Might Not Be Human, How AI and Outsourcing Are Rewriting the Rules, is brought to you by BQE. It qualifies for one AI learning unit. Again, AI California will report these for you if you stay on to complete today's session. Now to quickly introduce our presenter. Steve Burns, FAIA, is an architect, technologist, and business strategist who works directly with architecture and engineering firm owners to help them rethink how they price, position, and grow their practices. With decades of experience in both practice and consulting, Stephen has helped over 1,400 firms transition from commodity pricing to value-based approaches, typically seeing 15 to 25% improvements in project margins within the first year. His approach combines proven business strategy with a deep understanding of how architecture firms operate, creating practical frameworks that work in the real world of RFPs, client relationships, and competitive markets. Now, on to today's presentation. Thank you so much for being here, Steve, and I will hand it over to you.
Okay, great, Sarah. Thank you for that introduction. Welcome, everybody. I gotta go and share my screen, which is actually right here. So hopefully that's coming up for you right now. Um, if any of you, by the way, have attended any of my prior webinars, thank you for coming back here. What I do is every quarter, I build a new webinar. I do it from scratch. I don't do it from some trend or marketing report, but from what I actually see on the ground inside architecture and engineering firms that I work with weekly. Now, I do pay close attention to where firms are getting stuck or maybe areas of experimentation that's happening within the firm. And what keeps coming up in conversations, not just with my experience, but I see it, in social media, in the podcasts I listen to, and in certain industry news I read. The common thread for my webinars is always responding to these things, which is how can you build a firm that is relevant and prosperous and it's growing. Frankly, it's a firm that other firms wish they had. So this particular topic today, it came together pretty fast, or at least faster than most of them, because the noise around AI has been relentless. AI is everywhere today. Uh, some of what you're hearing is real, some of it is useful, and some of it's pure science fiction. And that's the stuff that's usually delivered with a lot of confidence. So this is not a webinar about, replacing your architects with robots or turning your firm into a Silicon Valley startup. It's about practical judgment. It's about understanding where this technology really fits, what problems it can help you solve today, and really just how to think about it as part of your firm and not like a threat to your firm. Because I actually don't, honestly do believe that your next hire might not be a human, and I'll talk more about what that means, but it still will require having great leadership. So I'll start with, like, maybe it's provocative. I try to find a provocative sentence for to start out my webinars. If your firm currently is not actively or intentionally experimenting with artificial intelligence, you are in fact acting irresponsibly. This is no longer a matter of, oh, well, we're going to be very careful and sit back and wait, or we're not a firm that's an early adopter. I mean, that ship has long since sailed. And I'll be precise about what I mean when I say you're irresponsible. I don't try to speak casually. I don't mean you're irresponsible now to your firm's profit margins, what you're going to expect to see in 2026. I don't mean you're irresponsible to how your firm is perceived out in the marketplace. I just mean you're being irresponsible to your people and to the long-term viability of your firm. And frankly, I'm going to spend a bit of time on this today, to the standing of the architectural profession itself. So before any of you just shut down or you start typing into the chat box, which I really have a difficult time paying attention to while I make my presentation here, I'm always impressed when I go to webinars and I see people speaking and simultaneously answering real-time questions that are feeding in there. I can't do that. Let me just tell you what I'm not saying. I'm not saying, once again, AI will replace architects. And I want you to be on the leading edge of that particular movement. I'm not saying your firm should even be laying people off because, oh, AI can do their jobs. And I'm not saying that software, or specifically AI, is in fact the future of our industry. And I am absolutely not here to sell you any tools or platforms or workflows. Okay, so that's not what this is going to be about. I'm here to talk about three very distinct things. And the first one is leverage. If you've heard me speak before, you might be familiar with my description of technology as one of the most significant levers that we have available. However, I'm not talking about technology directly. I'm talking about certain business fundamentals. Every professional service firm, it exists uh, because really it applies limited human effort in a way that can produce these outsized results. That's what leverage is about. It is the it's the difference between the effort you put in and the outcome that you get. So a business without leverage is really just a bunch of people laboring. A business with leverage is a system. And again, if you've heard me think or heard me speak before, I've talked to you about business thinking. Uh, you might have read that in any blog articles of mine as well. That this is a fundamental concept in business literacy, your ability to leverage things. And we see leverage in other areas. If you're not familiar with how we can use that. So, for example, we will use debt to build buildings that are larger than the balance sheets would otherwise allow us to do. So, the leverage is used everywhere in the world. And we also understand organizational leverage. We aren't designing alone. We coordinate with our consultants and contractors and vendors in order to multiply our impact. But I'll tell you this, though, where architecture has consistently struggled is the intellectual leverage. We still apply our most expensive human intelligence to work that really doesn't require it. And this is where AI is going to come in. Because we've always sought to leverage the technology that's been available to us. So CAD back in the 80s, it fundamentally changed production. Over the last decade, BIM, building information modeling, has transformed coordination and things like clash detection. So digital tools reduced errors. It accelerated documentation. It allowed firms to manage far more complexity than was ever previously possible. And we today see that complexity manifested in the built environment around us. Look how much more sort of imaginative the forms are that are really part of architecture today. But it's important to notice where that leverage showed up. Almost all of that leverage that we receive from our technology was applied to production and coordination. We drew faster, we modeled more accurately, and as I mentioned, with much more complexity. We were able to coordinate a lot more information. But what has not changed is how we apply leverage to our thinking and our judgment, to our decision making. So for a long time, more work meant you're going to need more people. And for the most part, it's pretty much that way. But as firms grow, we know coordination demands grow, and they grow faster than your output. More people require more management, more meetings, more handoffs, and eventually growth becomes less about capability and just more about managing all of that complexity that we have imposed upon ourselves. So, artificial intelligence doesn't replace the leverage that we have already gained. It extends it into areas that we have never ever really had tools for before. Not drafting faster, but preparing better. Not coordinating more, but clarifying sooner. And not producing more work, but helping judgment travel further. And I know a lot of you are looking at AI tools out there that are actually working towards helping you draw faster, do your production work faster. Okay, there are AI tools that are being deployed right now in some of your firms that are literally part of um, or being plugged into your production system. Today, we're going to be talking about other things because AI is not just about that. AI introduces a new form of leverage that we have never had. It just really allows your judgment to scale without requiring proportional increases in your headcount. It does not replace your professional judgment. It removes clerical, analytical, and repetitive work that delays your judgment, allowing experienced professionals to make decisions sooner because they have better information and they have that information faster. And this matters because architecture is not struggling due to its lack of talent. It's struggling because too much talent is really trapped doing low leverage work. And professions lose influence when their highest skill is buried under coordination and documentation and rework. And if you think about this seriously, this is where a lot of our certainly younger professionals are buried. Now, it doesn't really look dramatic when you think about it in most firms. Your principals, they're spending their time maybe trying to reconcile project reports, and it's just doing that to confirm what their intuition is already telling them. Maybe some of the project managers, they're acting like human middleware. They're kind of translating the data between the systems. They're rewriting the same kinds of status narratives. They're chasing information, and they're doing all that instead of making value added decisions. And then you've got your senior architects. They're repeating the same thinking over and over because there is no mechanism to scale judgment. That's what underutilization actually looks like in our firms. It's not a lack of intelligence, it's just an excess of friction. And over time, that friction is what exhausts people. It dulls your leadership. It just slowly drains our profession of our influence. Most of, if any of you own a firm or manage a firm right now, you're not doing any of this underutilization on purpose. You're responding to just very real pressures. We have our deadlines and our clients are demanding things from us. We've got backlog of work. We've got to manage our risk. We just got to get the work out the door, right? And over time, our firms develop familiar ways of working that just helps us cope with all those pressures. Those habits, generally, they are smart when they're formed because they solved a real problem at that time. And the challenge is that those ways of working, they tend to stick even as the world around us is changing, and it's changing faster and faster every day. Nothing actually breaks in your firm. Everybody's busy, but gradually, talented people, they spend more time on work that is that no longer really requires their level of experience or judgment. This is the quiet cost of staying comfortable with the status quo. It's not failure, it's not bad intent. It's just human intelligence is being used less thoughtfully than it could be. And I have talked repeatedly at other topics for a couple decades now on how the status quo, the way you do business, is actually one of the biggest impediments to that firms have to succeed in the future because they're so comfortable with how things are working today. They're not preparing for the tomorrow. By the way, I'm also here to discuss whether we are willing to redesign our firms with the same intentionality that we apply to the buildings that we create for our clients. And my company's name is the Well Designed Firm. And I really believe this is the greatest project you ever get to work on. It's building your own business, and you have all of the great skills to build amazing things. And we tend to focus too much of our attention, or let's just say 100% of our attention, on our client's project and not our own. It's just a symptom of being an architect. And I am speaking to you today, by the way, as someone who spent nearly all of my professional life in architecture, not just as a practitioner for 20 plus years, but as an advisor, as a coach, a thought partner for leadership. I sit in these partner meetings. I sit in succession meetings. I sit in these meetings where the principals can admit very quietly that the firm just is heavier to run each year, even though the work is good and the systems all seem great. And I'll also be transparent that I use AI constantly every single day. It's not some sort of novelty toy for me or a side experiment. It's part of my infrastructure. I use it to think. Certainly use it to challenge my thinking. I use it to draft. I use it to, I mean, don't not like draft, but to draft communication, let's say, to analyze information, to organize my information, and as I mentioned, really to challenge me. And also just to reduce the friction in my own work. It's just amazing the capacity I've been able to take on since these AI tools continue to become available to me. I've even learned how to hack the system by using AI as a way of habit stacking. That is not only improving my work, but it's making me healthier. And if any of you are curious about that one, we can talk about that during Q&A. Okay. So I have this lived experience informing everything that I do, and that's why I'm kind of sharing some of it with you all today, which is why it's not some sort of speculative thing. It's actually observational. So I know there's often fear associated with this topic of AI, but it's not about a conversation about potentially failing your clients because architects have always delivered for their clients. We are without question exceptionally good at serving clientele. It's a conversation about something deeper. It's about the diminishing role of the architect in our society. So I did touch on that also in my webinar last quarter, where we talked about how we need to shift fees from all those inputs, which is, all the human effort that we expend on those projects, to actually what is the actual value that our services deliver. But the underlying concern here today is the same thing. It is about whether the long and demanding path that we go through, education and internship and licensure, if that still leads to meaningful authority and influence in our society. It is about whether your staff feels like they're becoming professionals, or are they simply highly trained production labor? And it's about whether firm leaders sense that their practices are becoming sort of interchangeable in a market that increasingly values speed and cost over judgment, experience, and wisdom. So we actually our industry is sort of in a strange position. We are culturally admired. So if you look at surveys about where do architects stand in society amongst the professionals out there, we tend to rank extremely high, sort of just below doctors, but well above many others who are professionals, but they're entrusted with far less responsibility than we are. So, in other words, some of the smartest, most respected, and most highly trained professionals in the world are in this webinar right this moment. People whose education and licensure and their accountability place them among society's most trusted decision makers. And yet, in spite of all that, we routinely ask ourselves to spend extraordinary amounts of time coordinating information between our systems, managing friction, formatting documents, and reacting to problems that don't really require professional judgment. And if that pattern continues, AI is not the threat to the profession. The actual threat is that we continue to waste human intelligence on work that really doesn't require it. And to understand why this moment matters, I just want to step back and let's maybe look honestly at our history. Now, when I started practicing as an architect in the mid early 1980s, don't do the math, offices were structured very differently. Um, the firm I joined out of grad school had a full-time blueprinting department, an entire, very large room devoted to printing, collating, and distributing drawings. That's all they do. We had full-time model makers. That's plural. We had a physical model shop, and it was not an amenity. It was core to our design process. We had a couple of librarians who managed all of our codes and the standards, all the reference materials, all the marketing materials. We had full-time spec writers, and we had large drafting rooms filled with people whose primary role was manual production. That's where I started when I got out of school, in that room. And many of those roles are they either no longer exist or they exist in dramatically reduced form. And our profession didn't collapse, even though that occurred. It basically adapts. But we have to be very precise about how we ended up adapting. So as the CAD and the BIM, the other digital tools absorbed our manual production, architects didn't spend most of that reclaimed time exercising more authority or shaping more decisions. Instead, we largely reinvested it back into design and production itself. We generated more options, more iterations, more refinements, more versions of essentially the same idea. So let me just make sure I'm on focus mode. Sorry, that was bad of me to do that. Uh, can't seem to find that right now, so we'll just leave it alone. Anyway, so we were just reinvesting all of that time that we had been saving through our technology at making the architecture itself, the physical manifestation of a building, more interesting. So technology made it easier for us to explore form and aesthetics and variation, and we all leaned into that. And somebody who responded to my webinar last week wrote me afterwards and said, I got into this business because of design. I wanted to design, design, design. And this is our failing, is our focus is purely on design. So whenever we have an opportunity or a free moment, we pour it back into the design. And that, oddly enough, is not, that does not improve our stature in society. Our work became maybe more beautiful, maybe more resolved, not sure about that, maybe more polished through all that extra effort. But it has, if you think about the role of the architect in society today, there's a like literally these two lines just cross each other. The more we get better at making beautiful buildings, the less it seems we are that integral. Now, I do want to not make it seem like I don't care. I care very deeply about aesthetics. I personally will spend hours suffering over a detail that I know my client will never consciously notice because, you know, that care is just intrinsic to what I believe architecture is about. I think all of us are that way. We don't think of it as wasted effort. But there is a distinction that matters because we used technology fundamentally to expand design, not to expand our role in defining the problem or solving the problem outside of the physical way. And in practice, that meant we became very good at offering more choices without always helping our clients understand which choices actually matter. We delivered a lot more flavors, those more variations, more differentiation, but it's on the surface without a corresponding increase in strategic influence. So, meanwhile, for some of you, decisions about the scope and the budget and the schedule or the long term value of these projects, these were increasingly being shaped elsewhere. And it's not because we lacked the intelligence or the ambition. It's because our technology made iteration inexpensive and appealing. And within the very fixed schedules that we were given, we just used that time to produce more variations rather than to enhance our value. Just because you can add another menu option on your restaurant doesn't mean you're going to be a better restaurant. You just have more variation. So over time, this combination narrowed how our value was being perceived by our clients. So when we look at this moment now, today, with these AI tools becoming available to us, it's just important for us to recognize this pattern, our true nature, as design professionals. Because technology has always changed architecture. That is not anything new here. But what is new is we are entering a world where AI is able to generate forms, options, even entire buildings at a level of speed and sophistication that surpass any individual architect. And if our value remains tightly coupled to producing more design variations, that really better concern us. Not because design does not matter, it absolutely does. But if architects want to remain or regain themselves as a highly valued profession, our value must extend beyond what machines can generate and into the judgment and the framing and the decision making that clients and communities and society actually need from us. And that is the shift um, that this moment is demanding from us. And that is why I'm having this conversation with you today. So, AI kind of fits into that same historical pattern. It's not a break from how we have evolved in the past. We're always evolving. It's just another step in our progression. But the difference today is definitely pace. These shifts are happening faster, and their potential to hit every aspect of your firm is there, and it's all happening at the same time. And that speed is what makes leadership attention so important right now. I'm going to pause here and acknowledge something that's important because I know maybe some of you are thinking about that. So, over the last several decades, as I mentioned, I believe we have undeniably lost stature. Our fees have been compressed, our role has been narrowed, and in many cases, architects are treated less like strategic partners and just more like a commodity that can be purchased at a discount. And that theme was very big with my webinar last quarter. So it's very reasonable to ask whether the changes that we've been talking about have contributed to that outcome. And I don't think the loss of stature came from the technology. It stems from how our profession allowed its role to drift. I mean, the technology, as I mentioned, afforded us the abilities to do things, and I think we went down the wrong path. As our tools improved, we became faster and more efficient. And instead of using that efficiency to move upstream into strategy and leadership and decision making, we stayed largely focused on design and delivery. And you think about the awards that the AIA gives us, they almost always are based on design. So it's no wonder that our attention in our businesses are to win design awards. This is where the glory goes to architects. And that's because that is our almost singular focus. This is our problem. We got very good at producing documents. We got very good at coordinating complexity, but we did not consistently reposition ourselves as the people who should be shaping the problem, not just solving it through physical construction. I mean, helping our clients decide what problems are worth solving in the first place before we start to jump into solutions. But that's actually where architects can add disproportionate value. And that is the role we have gradually stepped away from. And over time, that choice that we took has had its consequences. When your value is framed primarily around output, price becomes the dominant differentiator. And when price dominates, stature will absolutely erode. So the lesson here isn't that change is dangerous, that AI is going to be a problem. The lesson is, what are you going to do with the leverage these tools are going to provide to you? Technology gives a profession some options. It doesn't tell you which one you should be taking. And AI presents the same choices again to us, but the stakes are so much higher this time. Now, we can use it to produce more. We can produce more faster, maybe even cheaper, or we can use it to reclaim time, attention, and authority around judgment, leadership, and trust. That choice is going to determine whether architects remain marginalized or reassert their role as essential partners in shaping the built environment. So, again, this is what I was talking about last quarter. I presented several case studies during that webinar that outlined exactly what some smart firms have done to elevate their position from just a service provider to become a strategic partner. So let's be very clear about what AI actually is and what it is not inside of your firm. AI is not an architect. It's not actually a designer. It does not actually have its own intent or values. It certainly doesn't have any accountability. It is simply, once again, a tool for leverage. It is exceptionally good at drafting those first passes, maybe summarizing large amounts of information, certainly incredibly good at identifying patterns across any kind of data. It's very good at organizing complexity, but it does not take any responsibility. It does not hold professional liability. It does not earn client trust. It doesn't sit across the table when a difficult decision has to be made. It just doesn't even feel the weight of that judgment. Those responsibilities remain entirely human. And so the risk we face is not that the artificial intelligence exists. It's That is already a given. The risk is disorganized adoption or quiet adoption, and for some of you, maybe even just unspoken adoption. When tools are used privately or inconsistently, or without leadership, anxiety increases and trust erodes. So this brings us to the question that you may or may not have asked yourself. When your workload increases or when somebody leaves your firm, the default response is almost always the same. We're going to post a job or we'll backfill that role. We try to restore capacity to what it was before. So finally, Steve's getting to that section about the actual title of today's webinar. So I've just had 30 some odd minutes of just fomenting for you. So that reflex that we have is rooted in an assumption that I think today needs to be challenged. And the assumption is that the work being done should continue to exist in the same form, performed by a human simply because that is how it was done in the past. The more important question you need to ask is whether you should hire, is not whether you should hire another person or um, buy another tool. The question is whether certain work should exist as full-time human labor at all. So every architectural firm, without exception, contains three very broad categories of work. First, there's that judgment work. Then there's the kind of coordination work. And of course, last is all that production work. And judgment work requires experience, ethics, taste, leadership, and accountability. That work will always remain human. It can be aided by AI, but ultimately these are human decisions. Production work is necessary, but it's increasingly non-differentiating. Doesn't really matter whether that was drafted by a human being or we have an AI tool that can actually execute on that. And I'm always impressed at what I see coming down the pike on those things. And coordination work sits somewhere in between. And it is where firms quietly expend enormous amounts of human energy, but at the same time, they don't get a corresponding value from all that. AI does not eliminate careers, it just changes which work actually deserves that career. And to make this one more concrete, I'm going to introduce a fictional firm. It's called Fountainhead Architects. I've been using Fountainhead Architects since 2004 in my demonstrations of things in the past. So can't it's not real. Unlike last quarter, these were real case studies. This is just a thought exercise for us today. And it's really just an experiment built from the kinds of patterns that I see occurring regularly. So you have to picture a firm. Doesn't matter actually if it's 5 people or 45 people or what you might have here. There's some principals, some staff, project managers, emerging professionals. The company's got a very nice culture, a solid client base, and they have this reputation for competence and care in the community. So the firm, they're busy, but they're strained. Probably almost every one of you is that. Feels like you could be Fountainhead Architects. Principals, they are still being pulled into projects in order to resolve some risk, calm clients, make some decisions that the organization itself hasn't yet learned how to absorb on its own. Your senior staff, they're overloaded. The project managers spend much of their time assembling information and managing friction. And the junior staff, they're productive, but they're largely reactive. And nothing here is broken. Certainly nothing broken badly enough to force anybody to change. And as I mentioned earlier, that is exactly the problem. So then something very ordinary happens at Fountainhead Architects. One of the project architects leaves. It is not a layoff. It wasn't a crisis, just normal attrition. Someone left for another firm or they're moving out of the state or got a new opportunity elsewhere. Maybe they're opening their own office. In almost every firm, the response is going to be automatic. Let's post this job. Let's restore our capacity. Let's keep moving. But Fountainhead, in our thought exercise, they pause, and the leadership in the firm asks three questions. What judgment did that person uniquely provide? What coordination were they responsible for? And what production filled most of their time card, let's say. Once again, it's judgment, coordination, and production. And the answers that they'll get are going to be revealing. Instead of rehiring immediately, the firm decides to run a 6-month experiment. They introduce AI support at their meetings in order to produce meeting summaries or do task tracking, provide internal documentation, first pass drafting. Not to replace anybody, but just to reduce coordination and the preparation of work. No one had to work any longer hours. No one is being laid off because they didn't backfill that role. The firm simply reorganizes where the intelligence in the firm is being applied. And then, let's say 6 months later, the delivery of their projects hasn't suffered. In fact, coordination errors decrease. Meetings are shorter or more meaningful. Fewer things will fall through the cracks. These are the functions that AI is exceptionally good at helping us with. So the real change is not efficiency, it's actually in clarity. Decisions are surfacing earlier, roles are better understood, problems are identified sooner, and people are becoming more accountable. They did not lose any capacity, they gained leverage. So, this is the point where, for some of you, the anxiety is going to start. Staff begins to wonder, what does that mean for them? Principals worry, how are we going to talk about this? And this is another little hard truth here. People are actually more afraid of the silence than they are of the actual change that is going on here. So if your leadership avoids having this conversation, trust me, your staff is going to fill in the blanks themselves, and the stories that they tell are almost always worse than the reality. Artificial intelligence is not a threat because it's so powerful. It becomes a threat only when leadership refuses to engage with it with intentionality. So the profession is not losing its relevance because technology is advancing. It loses relevance when it refuses um, to adapt or fails to leverage the technology appropriately. So, in this little next part, I just want to talk about what leaders can actually do in your practice, how you can experiment responsibly, how to redesign your work without sacrificing your people or your culture or your dignity. Okay? So let's talk about action. This is not going to be a sweeping transformation. There is no grand strategy. This is not an organizational overhaul. As I talked earlier about this problem with status quo, um, for years we were, oh, sorry, my phone just picked up something. Um, for years, we were trying to ask people to make these big changes in their companies, and the status quo was the big heavy anchor that was basically saying it's a big change, and therefore we can't even begin to initiate that because it's such a big change. So I don't want any large organizational overhauls to be imposed on your company. I'm just going to talk about a few concrete, practical steps that your leadership can take, which will not create panic. It won't destabilize the culture. And also, they cannot be pretending that they know what the answers are going to be here. The most important thing to understand is this: adopting artificial intelligence inside of your firm is not some sort of technical rollout. It's a it's a behavioral change. And the behavioral change does not start with policies that you're going to implement in your firm. It starts with simply permission. And maybe a big mistake a firm might make is they're going to announce we have this big AI initiative. So the moment you do that, you will trigger fear, for some resistance, for others, maybe some sort of like performative compliance. People begin to worry about job security instead of using that as an opportunity to learn and grow. So, a better approach than announcing this initiative is just to sponsor experiments. And if you haven't done these experiments before, they really have just four very simple characteristics. They need to be small, okay? They, they're time bound. So we're going to do an experiment and it's going to last X number of days or weeks or months. It has one very clear question, and people know that it's an experiment. It's okay to fail because you're not trying to prove that this AI works or trying to fit it in or make your firm figure out how to make it work. You're just trying to learn where does it help and maybe where it doesn't help. And that's a very important distinction. So I'll start with an area that almost every firm I know struggles with, and no one certainly finds any of it very fulfilling, and that is your internal coordination. This is what we talked about with the Fountainhead project. Meetings generate action items. Action items get lost. Decisions are made, but maybe they're not documented clearly. And people leave these meetings with very different understandings of what just happened here. Or maybe meeting minutes are distributed a day later and people are busy and they're not really reading them or responding to them. They're just filing them as a historical document. So there is no architectural judgment going on with any of these things I'm talking about. It's just about friction. So a very simple experiment in your firm might look like this. Let's for 30 days, let's use some AI assistance to summarize our internal meetings, extract some action items, and distribute those to all of the parties and make sure that the parties are accountable to deliver on those. These are not client-facing documents. Certainly, there's no design authorship happening here. It is just internal clarity. And at the end of the 30 days, you just ask a few simple questions. Are fewer things falling through the cracks? Are our meetings shorter? Are people spending less time clarifying what was already decided and we just rehash the same topics over and over again? Is the accountability of people improving? And if the answer is yes, you've learned something very useful. And if the answer is no, what do? You stop. Either way, no one's role was actually threatened. Here's another safe experiment, which has to do with like sort of like early stage analysis. So every firm has these moments where someone is asked to pull together like a first pass or a zoning and code analysis, a precedent study, a list of risks that might be associated with a project. So these are not final answers. These are all just starting points for your project. So an experiment here might involve using AI to generate all of those first passes with the explicit understanding that a human will review and correct and frankly just decide what here really matters. So the question you are asking is not whether the AI is going to be perfect. The question is whether your people are starting from a higher level of thinking. Do they spend less time collecting information and more time interpreting it? Because that is what leverage is. A lot of the principals spend incredible amounts of time trying to understand what is actually going on inside of their business. They look at all these reports. They might ask some questions. They wait for summaries. And to be honest, many don't really dig into the numbers or try and figure out the why behind all those numbers. So, an experiment might be involving AI to synthesize operational information and do it into plain language insights. Not about dashboards, it's not about spreadsheets. It's to let the AI give you narrative explanations. What changed this past month? Where is our time being spent? What kind of things are happening that is causing the work to stall? And the goal isn't about precision. We don't need to get to the, fourth decimal place here. The goal is just earlier awareness or even awareness for some of you. And you'll get better questions, and those will lead to better decisions. We solve the same problems over and over again. Our details are constantly being redrawn. I know a lot of you work very hard on your detail libraries and are using AI tools to try and make sense of all of that. These are great things. But we are redrawing things, we're relearning the same lessons. For many of us, we make mistakes over and over again. So, an experiment here might involve using AI to surface prior solutions, review, go through the notes or the lessons learned when a similar situation arises. And this is not replacing your expertise. It's what these tools will do is they'll reduce your amnesia. And I apologize because I'm not allowed to talk about any of the tools out there. Maybe some of you are aware of these tools, or you can reach me offline. We could talk about them. But at the webinars, I'm not allowed to talk about the tools. Okay. None of this is going to work as long as your leadership is vague. People have to hear a few things very clearly. First, that these are experiments and they're not about reducing headcount. Second, participation in these experiments is going to be encouraged, but you can't coerce it from people. And third, learning how to work with these new AI tools will increase one's professional relevance. And when people understand the intent, I promise again, their fear will subside. So when you think about this staffing question, if someone leaves your firm, I don't want you to rush to backfill them. I want you to pause. Again, ask them what judgment you actually lost, what coordination could be redesigned. We have an opportunity to redesign something. How often do we enjoy things like that? Um, what production could be supported differently? And sometimes the answer is going to end up being you're going to hire another human being. I'm not telling you that that's not going to happen, but I will almost guarantee you that the person you hire will be different. You're going to be now hiring for judgment, leadership, and trust, not just capacity. There's always pressure, especially when you are very busy, to backfill that role with anyone who has the, let's call it the minimum viable skills to fill that role. We don't have that. Now we have this opportunity to really get the best quality candidates for our futures. So this attrition that can happen in a firm, it should be creating opportunities for your firm, not trauma. You will need boundaries. Certainly, client confidentiality most likely matters a lot. Professional responsibility is critical, but governance should enable your experimentation, not just shut it down. So if somebody says, we can't do this because client confidentiality, that's a shutdown, okay? That's not really having a discussion. And I think having some clear guidance about what we're protecting here and how we protect it is much more important than the shutdown or the silence. I want you to really trust your professionals, give them certain guardrails, but don't build these walls that they cannot penetrate. I also don't think firms that are going to use AI will necessarily be any smaller or frankly larger. I know what they will be. They will be more focused. They will make fewer hires, but better ones. And they will give their people more leverage and they'll give them more meaningful work. I don't think meaningful work is just giving more iterations, okay? And this is not a technology outcome. It's actually an organizational design outcome, how you design your firm. I'm going to close with this little thought. Architects and architecture doesn't lose relevance because of this change in technology. And a lot of you I see in blog articles, oh, these various tools are creating designs that are, wonderful and outrageous. It's like Hollywood is designing them. That's really not the threat to our profession. It loses, architecture loses our relevance when we refuse to adapt. And, and again, AI is not your next hire. but what it's giving you is leverage. And what I want, what you do with that leverage is certainly up to you. And I've tried to make the case that what we've done in the past with CAD and BIM isn't to increase the leverage to our advantage. It's to increase the leverage to the advantage of our client. And you might think by extension that means you as well. And certainly maybe to the advantage of the artifact, the building itself. So, by the way, if anything I've talked about sparked anything in you, whether it's good things or anger, please reach out to me. I always love to have these discussions with people. You can go to my website. You can sign up for a free, like 30-minute talk with me. Love to meet you and hear what's going on in your firms. I also want to thank my friends at BQE. Okay, so finally we're going to get to a poll question that we're going to launch for you here. And if any of you, BQ, thank you for inviting me to talk to the group today, but if any of you have not done a demo of BQE Core, please respond yes to this. It's definitely worth your time, especially in these days, looking at the tools that are really on the cutting edge of technology. BQE Core is a platform that helps in business and project and resource management for your firms, all the stuff that you probably don't find inherently fun, because the buildings are what makes us fun. The architecture is what makes you fun, makes it fun. Just ask you, please, even if you've looked at Core in the past, look at it again and get a demo and ask hard questions about how this might work for your firm, because this is a product that is constantly improving and getting better. Also, do your homework, research some of the other solutions that are out there in the market. I always recommend people looking at solutions designed specifically around the needs for an architecture firm, and find out which one really fits you the best. So with that, we can leave that up and running. We got time left. I'm hanging out as long as you want for any questions, and we'll leave the poll up while we do that. So, any questions for us? Anybody muted? Let's see. I don't know, Christy or Sarah, do we have any questions?
I can get to them, Steve. This is
Sure.
Christy.
Okay, Christy.
Um, yeah, let's get started. So, how do you ensure that new professionals still gain the embodied knowledge of experienced professional if they skip some of the steps due to using AI?
Yeah, I actually attended a technology and practice conference probably 20 years ago from the AIA, and there was an architect who at that time was probably in his 80s, who was lamenting the fact when he was growing up in the industry that and he had a beautiful photograph of the studio where it was like young architect seated at a drafting table, and next to them, which by the way was a him at the time, pretty much, I think it was exclusive. Next to him was a more mature architect who was like his mentor, if you will, making sure that this person was drafting and understanding what every line meant. And, we had incredible details that had to be drawn by hand. And he frankly felt, wow, unless you draw these by hand, all this CAD software that was being introduced, and then later the BIM software, was taking away the ability for the architect to understand how things actually get built. And so this is a question that every generation of architects thinks is the next generation is never going to be able to learn because of technology. It's not the technology that takes away the architect's ability to learn. My fear is that you're letting this technology um, take over, and what are you off doing with that time? And if all you're off doing is reskinning a building or changing it sculpturally and all of that, uh, that is a characteristic that can happen because certainly from the BIM side of things, it enables all of those options. I'm saying these are actually finally opportunities for you to reinvest in your architects, understanding where they bring value to the client and to society. And it's not necessarily in how two pieces of stone come together or a piece of wood meets a piece of stone. And even though we went to electronic drafting, it doesn't mean they lost that quality, the ability to comprehend this either, which is the fear of that architect some 20 plus years ago.
Thank you. And Steve, well, let's see. This is more of a Sarah question now. Can we answer one last question?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, you can.
Okay, let's run this one because it's supposed to be a fun one.
Okay.
Can you expand on how you're using AI to making your life healthier?
Oh, this is my habit stacking. Okay, so I actually write a lot of prompting. My idea of there's two ways I use prompting. I could use it as almost like a person sitting across from me and having them have a conversation with me, which really keeps me seated in my chair. But when I do prompting, um, I generally like the ones that will require it to take a few minutes to think about it. Like it could take 5 or 10 minutes before I get a response back. And I'll use that to do calisthenics. Okay, so my wife always complains I'm sitting at my desk too much. So finally, I figured out AI has given me the ability to put the prompt in. It's going to take a few minutes, and I will go a few reps of push-ups and sit-ups and crunches and so forth, but at my desk. So that's the way I was doing that habit stacking because I wasn't getting to the gym easy enough because I was stuck in the desk, if you will.
Thank you for that. I think I will need to go to practice.
Sure.
So thank you, everyone. Sarah.
So, thank you so much for everyone joining us today. If you've made it this far, AI California will submit you for one AIA learning unit. The recording and additional resources can be posted on the AIA California website. You'll also be receiving follow-up information on how you can access that information, and for those that may need the certificate today. Thank you again so much for Steve and Christy being here, and thank you to BQE, and we will see you at our next BQE webinar. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks all.